a Boy Scout, a guerrilla, and a lawyer. They came from starkly different socio-economic backgrounds and geographical locations. At least two were barefoot poor, while one was from the landed gentry, and their upbringings and political formation in distant corners of the continent varied considerably. If nothing else, I hope the extent of those differences becomes clearer over the following pages. As much as the men differed, so too did their political movements. Each arose from its own specific nationalist context, and was created to a large degree in its leader's image. Of Hugo Chávez came Chavismo. Lula was the father of Lulismo in Brazil. The Sandinistas in Nicaragua became Orteguistas for their undying loyalty to Daniel Ortega, and the power structure in Cuba was always better defined as Castroite than Marxist. Yet in the first decade of the 21st century, they coalesced in a unique moment of Latin American political history. Fueled by sky-high commodities prices, they achieved huge reductions in extreme poverty and inequality. They funneled their resource-based riches into new social programs and expensive infrastructure from oil refineries to cable car systems above the shanty towns. Their largesse with the oil and gas money knew no bounds at home and around the region. And they were untouchable at the polls. Their fervently committed followers were elated to at last have one of their own inside the presidential palace. Within just 7 years, they had fundamentally redrawn the political landscape in the Americas. Cuba, for decades a communist pariah and an outcast, was brought back into the fold, and its waning revolution was propped up by Venezuelan oil. Latin America changed before its voters' eyes, and the rest of the world was forced to sit up and take notice. It was, quite simply, the most important political movement in the Western Hemisphere of the modern era. Yet within a decade and a half, the party was over. Hugo Chávez was dead, Lula was in jail, Rafael Correa was in exile facing corruption and kidnapping charges. By late 2019, Evo Morales resigned at the behest of the military and went into exile too. As the price of oil fell, so did the era of unconstrained generosity and benevolence. In Venezuela, the front-runner and the most radical of the pink-tide nations, the economy collapsed completely. More than 4 million people fled the country in barely 3 years. A movement that had once promised so much was either floundering or had crumbled entirely. In its place, several governments morphed into pseudo-left-wing kleptocracies, run by repressive authoritarians. In some cases, the constitutions had been changed to allow indefinite presidential re-election and concentrate power in the hands of the executive. The leaders in Venezuela and Nicaragua clung on to power in the face of massive student-led uprisings, and rather than engaging in dialogue, they unleashed lethal military force against the demonstrators. Hundreds were killed on the streets. Elsewhere in the region, the leftists were forced out by their polar opposites. Lula in Brazil, for example, was a genuinely democratic socialist, with a clear sense of the value of participatory democracy, of negotiation and diplomacy. The man who eventually took his place in the presidential palace, the far-right former army captain, Jair Bolsonaro, has reverted to the ugliest strongman tactics of Latin America's past. He has brutalized his opponents, debased political discourse in Brazil, and divided the nation more starkly than at any time since the military dictatorships of the 1960s and 1970s. In Bolivia, a staunchly conservative and evangelical group of politicians was instrumental in ejecting the indigenous left-wing president, Evo Morales, from power, and then banishing him from the country. In both cases, the right wing dug in its heels, having employed many of the populist tactics and rhetoric of the very leftists they replaced. The question many now ask is whether the pink tide in Latin America was a passing political current or a genuine sea change. Millions of the poorest in the region were left marooned or drowning. Others fared